Welcome back to my channel, Famous and Fabulous. Is this the end of Heavy D from Diesel Brothers? Heavy D went from being a regular guy who loved motor engines in Utah to becoming famous across America. In a tough entertainment world that had shows like Street Outlaws and Fast and Loud, Heavy D also stood out, winning over viewers with his amazing and creative truck builds. But behind those awesome builds, a big problem has been growing for years. That problem has swallowed Heavy D up, destroyed his business, taken away a huge amount of his money, and forced him to walk away from what he loves most. It is the reason Diesel Brothers was suddenly shut down. So what really happened to Heavy D Sparks? Can he get back up and change his own story? Fans aren't even expecting this. Heavy D was born into a simple family in Salt Lake City, Utah. What the family didn't have in money, it made up for in discipline, hard work, and toughness. This was thanks to his strict father, who was a United States Army veteran. The Army let Heavy D's father go because he had a brain tumor and was given a few weeks to live. Those weeks turned to years, and Heavy D's father kept on fighting to live. But it wasn't easy. At some point, the family were living on the street because the family didn't have any money to rent a house. Yet love still filled their family, and despite being strict, his father was a comforting and loving presence. Under that disciplined but caring environment, Heavy D was a curious child. And there was one thing that made him most curious: motor engines. This wasn't just a casual interest in engines like most kids had. Heavy D was obsessed with machines. When he was a teenager, all he needed was motor engines. He could spend hours just playing around with dirt bikes, four-wheelers, and trucks. He even preferred to work on engines than sit down in a classroom. Classes were so boring to him that he claimed that he learned more with a wrench in his hand than with a pen in a classroom. This was true. Heavy D was so into engines that he spent most of his time in high school studying auto mechanics, welding, and fabrication. His parents also played a part in his love for cars. After the Army let his dad go, Heavy D's father installed car stereos. This influenced Heavy D, who was obsessed with cars. When his father was too sick to install car stereos, his mother took over. After he finished high school, Heavy D looked for work, and his friend Rich Eggett gave him one. Rich owned an ATV and motorcycle rental business and hired Heavy D as the business's manager. Heavy D was focused, and he learned everything he could from the business. However, education was still important, so he signed up for college when he was 21 years old. His dad taught him the values of determination and never giving up, and Heavy D was forever grateful for that. Heavy D's father survived a stroke and still lived with a brain tumor. If his father could survive all that, what was college that he couldn't power through? But unfortunately, his father wasn't always there. After all the struggle with his health, Heavy D's father died when he was just 21. His father's death left a hole inside Heavy D. But despite that empty feeling, Heavy D knew he had to keep going and be there for his family. He was determined to be more successful than ever, but he didn't think college would help him reach that goal. Before, he didn't feel like he fit in. So why stay? After one semester of college, he left. His loss became a turning point in his life, one that would shape the path he chose. Heavy D chose to work for his uncle. His uncle ran a construction company and worked across job sites across Utah. Heavy D worked as a heavy equipment operator, and he felt more at home than he ever did during his short time in college. The work was physical, but Heavy D never complained, and soon he began to stand out. Unlike the other guys he worked with, Heavy D has big plans. He wasn't happy just collecting hourly wages. His goal, he wanted to be so much more, and was always looking out to find opportunities. Operating heavy equipment was already tiring, but this didn't stop Heavy D from working as director of marketing for Rich Eggett, who now owned a watch company named Rockwell Watches. Heavy D was inspired. He decided to bet on himself, and his goal was to open his own business and go after the kind of projects he was excited about. Heavy D wanted to take control of his life and fully explore his own potential. Just a few years after he started to work for his uncle, Heavy D launched his own business. It was an excavation business. He cleared lots, graded driveways, and moved dirt. Then his business grew bigger. Heavy D began to build rock walls, waterfalls, and do other types of landscaping jobs. Heavy D understood marketing, and he knew that if he wanted to grow, his work had to speak for itself. So, Heavy D threw himself into work completely, sometimes working for about 12 hours a day. He did such a great job that his clients began to recommend him to other people, and jobs kept pouring in for him. Still, this was far from Heavy D creating giant diesel engines. So how did he go from a construction worker to creating huge machines? Heavy D is a religious man. He attends and is an active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the LDS Church. He was part of the church's missionary program and served for 2 years in the Amazon region of Bolivia and Brazil when he was young. That missionary service made stronger what his father taught him about the values of service, compassion, and hard work. Heavy D kept on going to church events, and it was during one of the many church events he went to that he met David Kiley, the man who would later be known as Diesel Dave. Dave and Heavy D share the same passion for religion, and they soon became best friends. When Heavy D started his excavation company, he hired Dave to operate and manage the equipment in 2008. He also hired 2 other guys to help Dave out. Heavy D continued running his excavation company, but his love for motor engines kept growing. Heavy D could no longer ignore it. And in 2009, shortly after he got married, Heavy D applied for and got his dealer license. Heavy D created a new company, Diesel Sellers, and opened a used car lot. He began to sell cars, but this wasn't what he planned to do all his life. Heavy D wanted to open a company where he would fix and customize vehicles. Slowly but surely, Heavy D went from selling cars to fixing them and eventually modifying them. But he needed help if he was going to grow bigger. However, he had to hire the right people to help him out. The problem was, who could Heavy D trust? The first on his list was Diesel Dave. The 2 of them had the same interests. They were both religious, loved anything that was connected to a mechanical engine in any way, and they both loved massive trucks. It was just their love of machines that made them work so well together. The 2 matched each other really well in other areas. Heavy D was the business guy with the crazy big dreams and the amazing marketing skills. Dave was the guy who brought the humor and the talent for putting on a show. Heavy D created the company Sparks Motors so he could build customized diesel trucks, make them unique, and eventually sell them for profit. The 2 made crazy designs, testing the limits of their modified trucks and performing dangerous stunts. But they had an idea. The 2 could build their trucks and show the whole world how it worked. That way, they could entertain themselves and also market their trucks. This was the early years of YouTube, and the 2 decided to take their builds there. They created a channel and began to film the trucks they built. Their first attempts were rough. The camera kept shaking and it was messy all over. But they were just beginning and were just having fun. Despite the shakiness and roughness, there was one thing about their videos that stood out. They were authentic, real, and passionate. This realness and the kind of crazy stunts they pulled made the audience love them. How could the audience not like watching big trucks jumping over cars? They became one of the symbols of American truck culture. They gave people a show and were seen as the heroic underdogs doing amazing things. They provided the kind of raw entertainment and thrill the audience wanted. And in 2014, they took things to a different level. They made a video of one of their trucks pulling a 10-ton trailer. The video became an instant hit, and the 2 were on their way to becoming celebrities. The internet has already seen the rise of unlikely celebrities, skateboarders, pranksters, and vloggers, but mechanics who were also pranksters. That was new territory, and Heavy D and Dave were ruling it. Heavy D was happy with the progress he was making. So, he and Dave got even more daring with their builds. One of their builds that stood out and reached legendary status is the Mega Ram Runner 3. They showed it off at the 2014 SEMA show and drew massive attention for its huge size and engineering brilliance. Till today, fans still talk about it as one of the most iconic diesel builds ever showcased at SEMA. What they didn't know was with each build like this, chaos was just around the corner. Heavy D and Dave continued to do what they did. But here's where things get interesting. They enjoyed what they did more than the money it gave them. This allowed them to make some marketing decisions, which I'll tell you about later on. Because Heavy D focused on entertaining rather than the money side, he and Dave could take risky creative decisions. One of them was a prank they pulled with a truck in 2016. They hooked the tailpipe of the truck into a bathroom and blew smoke into that bathroom. A friend of theirs was in the bathroom and the smoke blew over that friend. Heavy D and Dave found it funny. The internet found it funny, and Jay Leno found it funny too. Jay said, even though it was the funniest prank he had ever seen, using a truck for the prank made it even more unique. However, there was a group who didn't find it funny, and they are the reasons Heavy D got destroyed, and we'll get to them soon. Jay Leno invited them to his show, The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. He had a segment he called Prank You Very Much. Like that, the 2 weren't just internet sensations anymore. They had become mainstream celebrities. But what they didn't know was they had barely begun. After the show, Discovery called Heavy D. They wanted to make a show about him and Dave. Discovery already had experience with car shows and had tasted success with shows like Fast and Loud and Street Outlaws. Heavy D and Diesel Dave would be a breath of fresh air, a louder, riskier, and more high-stakes breath of fresh air. But maybe if Discovery knew how high stakes it would be, maybe they wouldn't have worked with Heavy D and Diesel Dave at all. The show was a huge success. The duo just built on what they already did on YouTube. They continued to turn ordinary diesel trucks into huge, unique builds and performed crazy stunts. The audience found the chemistry between Heavy D and Dave exciting. The two joked around and drew the audience in with their personal and conversational ways of engaging the audience. The audience enjoyed that the crew felt more like family than co-workers. Within months, Diesel Brothers was a breakout hit. But there was a big problem. Heavy D looked past the problem and continued to do what they did. As their popularity grew, Heavy D looked for new ways to market his companies. So he began to do promotional giveaways through diesel sellers. What Heavy D did was to give fans a chance to win custom trucks featured on the show. These giveaways were an amazing idea. It made the show more special. Viewers began to feel like they were part of the family. Imagine being able to not only watch a monster truck being built on national television, but also having the chance to own it. It even made Heavy D and Dave more popular. It helped remove some of the heat on them too, because they had started to struggle. In 2016, right when the show was beginning, the Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment, UPE, sued the Diesel Brothers for $118 million. They accused Diesel Brothers of repeatedly breaking federal law. If the Diesel Brothers were really breaking a law, why weren't they arrested? Did the police look the other way on purpose? The law UPE accused them of breaking was a pollution law. They claimed the black smoke from the trucks they modified was one of the most toxic types of pollution there is. UPE accused Diesel Brothers of poisoning the air and playing a role in the rise of asthma spikes and heart issues. The UPE weren't making claims without proof. They had been investigating for a while. They gathered each video Heavy D and Dave uploaded as evidence against them. Then for the cherry on top of their investigation, they bought a modified 2013 Ford F-250 for $43,000 from Heavy D. Afterwards, they submitted the truck for an independent test. The test results showed that truck produced 36 times the pollutants and 21 times the particulate matter compared to a stock truck. This was really bad news for Heavy D, and now he and Dave were in a big mess. Do you think Heavy D is responsible for killing the environment and making people sick? Their fans didn't think so, and they rushed to Heavy D's defense. They enjoyed the show his show produced and wanted it to continue. And this quickly became a battle. Fans believed the UPE was trying to get the government to restrict the freedom of truck lovers and kill the truck culture. The UPE believed they were doing the best thing for the environment and for people who were at the risk of getting sick. Fans also thought UPE was trying to bully underdogs like Heavy D and Diesel Dave. Heavy D and Diesel Dave also didn't just sit quietly either. They claimed they never wanted to break any law and that their builds on the show were mostly for entertainment and not for everyday use. Does this mean that the Diesel Brothers show is staged? Are the giveaways fake? Because fans that win those cars would definitely drive them. Those close to Heavy D believed the case was a witch hunt. The court also heavily criticized UPE for seeking $118 million in a case involving only 19 trucks and about 100 parts. What was supposed to be a show about big trucks had become a messy drama that slowly began to drain Heavy D both mentally and financially. Then it got worse. In June 2018, an emissions inspector based in Davis County, Utah, gave a crushing testimony against Diesel Brothers. He revealed that a Diesel Brothers truck had been illegally modified. The judge that heard the testimony ordered that Heavy D and Dave should never make any similar modifications in the future. The Diesel Brothers were devastated, but they weren't changing their stance. Heavy D insisted that he was modifying trucks only for off-road use. He said he was under the impression that it was legal and claimed he was working with the Environmental Protection Agency to ensure compliance. He even offered to clean up the air in the Wasatch Front and repair low-income folks' emissions for free. The UPE was not ready to compromise, and in March 2020 they got what they wanted. The court fined Heavy D and his associates $850,000. The court said Heavy D had violated the law hundreds of times. Heavy D was shocked. That was a lot of money and he wasn't going to just give up the fight. So in April 2020 he appealed, but by 2021, Heavy D and his associates lost the appeal, and the court asked them to pay around $930,000 in legal fees. The case took around 6 years and it had cost Heavy D close to $2 million. But But that wasn't the only thing it cost Heavy D. Suddenly, Diesel Dave and Heavy D weren't just the fun-loving prankster mechanics. They had become the faces of a national conversation about climate, cars, and freedom. For the executives at Discovery, that spotlight was too hot to handle. They weren't so confident about giving the Diesel brothers a platform anymore. The fans too noticed a change. The Diesel brothers' builds weren't as wild as they used to be. Heavy D had to be working with Discovery's legal teams constantly. The legal team watched each episode before it was aired to avoid emissions violations. This was why the episodes felt different. The brothers weren't allowed to be as creative as they could be. In 2021, an episode had to be scrapped because it showed an exhaust mod which looked illegal. They weren't sure it was, but that doubt was enough. In 2023, Heavy D didn't have it in him anymore. He told Discovery he and his guys were done, and they chose to leave just like that. One lawsuit and everything Heavy D built came crashing down. Will this be the end of him? Heavy D is from a family where resilience is their motto. It was supposed to crush him completely. But over the years, Heavy D has acquired assets to protect him. He also is still popular, so Heavy D and his crew return to YouTube full-time. There, they can be free, following their own creative directions and engage the audience, all while obeying the law. Will that last for